Alien billionaire discovers human janitor caring for her disabled daughter. Her shocking response. The Galactic Research Academy was a marvel of advanced technology, a towering structure of shimmering metal and transparent surfaces that glowed softly in the dimming light of the alien sunset. Inside, everything was pristine. The floors were smooth, polished to a mirror-like finish. The walls seemed to hum with the energy of 1,000 different races, all dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. But to Colin Grant, it was just another day in a place where he was invisible. Dressed in his plain janitor's jumpsuit, Colin pushed his cart through the empty hallways, mopping up the occasional spill or wiping down the sleek surfaces that dotted the hallways. The academy was meant for the elite, the best and the brightest of the Galactic Confederation. It wasn't a place for someone like him. No one paid him any attention. The alien students whispered and giggled behind their hands as he passed, their laughter cutting off when he entered rooms. To them, he was just another worker, another cleaning drone who existed to keep their perfect world spotless. But Colin had learned to ignore it. He kept his head down, did his work, and let the rich and powerful go about their business. He had his reasons for being here. It wasn't a job he loved, but it paid the bills. It was a job he needed, and that was enough for him. The halls were quiet this evening, much quieter than usual. The students had long since gone home, leaving only a handful of staff to clean up the remnants of the day. The peace suited Colin. He could move through the halls without the constant whispers, without the stares that made him feel small. There was something calming about the stillness. As he rounded the corner near the science wing, a faint sound broke the silence. A soft whimpering, like the sound of someone in distress. Colin paused, listening closely. It came from a classroom up ahead, room 12B. It was a specialized lab for advanced xenobiology, a place he rarely entered. The door was slightly ajar, a thin strip of light spilling out into the darkened hallway. Curiosity tugged at him, and against his usual instincts to avoid getting involved, Colin approached the door. He peered through the gap, his eyes scanning the room. Inside, sitting alone in a high-tech wheelchair, was a young alien girl. She looked no older than 8 or 9. Her skin was a pale shade of green, almost translucent under the harsh lighting of the lab. Her hair was a mess of silvery strands, falling in disarray around her face. And her eyes were large and round, a deep, mesmerizing shade of violet, filled with a mix of frustration and confusion. Colin noticed immediately that something was wrong. The girl was covered in a strange, glowing substance, a medical paste of some kind, smeared across her face and hands. She was trying to wipe it away, but her movements were uncoordinated, and all she managed to do was smear it further, making the mess even worse. Another whimper escaped her lips as she pressed the sleeve of her shirt against her face, trying to wipe the residue off. But it didn't seem to help. It only made things worse. Feeling a wave of sympathy, Colin stepped forward and gently pushed the door open. "Hey there," he called softly, keeping his voice calm and friendly. "Looks like you could use a hand." The girl's head snapped up, her wide eyes locking onto him. She seemed startled at first, and there was a flicker of fear in her gaze, but she didn't say anything. "I'm not here to hurt you," Colin reassured her. "I work here. My name's Colin." The girl stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to decide whether or not she could trust him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. Her voice was small, almost a whisper. "I'm Mira." "Mira," Colin repeated gently. "Nice to meet you." Colin knelt beside her, trying to make himself less intimidating. He reached into his cleaning cart and pulled out a clean microfiber cloth. He dampened it with some purified water from his bottle, then looked up at Mira. "Mind if I help you clean up a bit? That stuff looks uncomfortable." Mira hesitated, looking at the cloth, then back at Colin. For a moment, she said nothing, but finally, she nodded. Colin carefully wiped the glowing paste from her face, making sure to be gentle. Mira flinched at first, but as the cloth touched her skin, she relaxed a little. It took a few minutes, but soon enough, the worst of the residue was gone. Colin stepped back, taking a moment to assess his work. "How's that?" he asked with a smile. Mira looked up at him, her face now clean, though still pale and tired. For the first time since Colin had entered the room, she smiled. A small, shy smile that tugged at his heart. "Much better. Thank you." "You're welcome," Colin said, smiling back. What is this stuff, anyway? Mira tilted her head slightly, considering the question. Regenerative enzyme paste, she said, her tone matter-of-fact. It's supposed to help with my neural pathways, but it burns and itches. Colin frowned, a wave of sympathy washing over him. That sounds rough. You're pretty brave to handle it. My mother says that Azurans don't complain about necessary discomfort, Mira replied with a small shrug. It was clear she had said this many times before. Well, I think even the bravest warriors deserve a break sometimes, Colin said with a wink, earning a genuine smile from Mira. Before he could say anything else, the door to the classroom swung open with a soft whoosh, and a tall figure stepped inside. Colin looked up to see a woman standing in the doorway, her presence commanding attention. She was tall and regal, with deep purple skin that shimmered subtly under the harsh lights. Her golden eyes locked onto Colin, and for a brief moment, there was a look of shock and perhaps even a hint of suspicion in her gaze. What are you doing with my daughter? The woman asked in a cool, controlled voice, though there was an unmistakable edge of authority in her tone. Colin froze, standing up quickly. I was just helping her. She needed a hand with the paste on her face. The woman's eyes softened, just a fraction. She studied Colin for a long moment, then turned her gaze to Mira, who was sitting calmly in her wheelchair, her face now free of the glowing substance. Is that true, Mira? The woman asked, her voice gentler now. Mira nodded eagerly. Yes, Mama. He helped me. The woman's gaze returned to Colin, lingering for a moment longer than necessary. Finally, she spoke, her tone shifting. I see. That was considerate of you. Colin gave a modest shrug, not sure how to respond. Just doing my job, ma'am. The woman, Myra's mother, took a slow step forward, her gaze still fixed on Colin. She didn't seem entirely convinced, but something about the way Mira looked at him seemed to reassure her. I'm Lyra, she said, her voice still cool, but with a subtle softness. Myra's mother. Nice to meet you, Ms. Lyra, Colin said, nodding politely. Lyra studied him for a long moment before nodding slightly. Thank you for helping her, she said, her voice carrying a note of genuine gratitude. Colin smiled, relieved. Anytime, he replied, stepping back toward the door. As Lyra wheeled Mira away, she turned back to Colin, her golden eyes lingering on him. We'll be in touch, she said, before disappearing with her daughter into the next room. Colin watched them go, a strange feeling settling in his chest. He didn't know what to make of the encounter, but he knew one thing for certain. This was the beginning of something he hadn't expected. The days that followed were a blur for Colin Grant. His routine at the Galactic Research Academy remained unchanged. Mop the floors, empty the trash, and scrub every inch of the gleaming building until it shone. But something had shifted. Myra's face, the way her violet eyes had looked up at him with that mix of gratitude and innocence, refused to leave his mind. He found himself glancing at the science wing, hoping to see her again. But with her mother, Lyra, being so busy, Colin didn't expect their paths to cross again. Yet, it wasn't long before Colin's world collided with Myra's once more. It was late in the afternoon, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the academy's marble floors. Colin was finishing up his work in the hall near the science wing when the soft buzz of his comlink broke the silence. Colin Grant, report to Principal Jorin's office immediately. The voice crackled. Colin frowned, glancing at his cleaning cart. In his 6 months working at the academy, he had never been called to the principal's office. Curious and a little uneasy, he left his cart behind and made his way down the long hallway to the administrative wing. Principal Jorin's office was exactly what Colin had expected, a stark, sterile room, lined with cold metal shelves and holographic screens. The principal, a tall, thin alien with 4 eyes, was already seated behind a desk, his stern expression betraying nothing. But it was the woman standing beside him that caught Colin's attention. Lyra. She stood tall and composed, her regal purple skin reflecting the soft light of the room. Her golden eyes were fixed on Colin as he entered, and for a moment, he felt a wave of unease wash over him. There was something about her presence that commanded attention, and he couldn't quite shake the feeling that he was in over his head. Mr. Grant, Principal Jorin began, his voice low and formal. Please, take a seat. Colin hesitated but did as instructed, sitting across from the two of them. His mind raced. What could they possibly want with him? Lyra stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. Colin, I've been watching your work, she said, her voice calm and measured. And I've heard about your interaction with Mira. Colin's heart skipped a beat. Mira, he repeated, unsure what to say. Had he done something wrong? Lyra didn't give him a chance to explain. She continued, her tone steady but filled with intent. You showed her more kindness in that brief moment than most of her caretakers have in months. You helped her without thinking twice about it. Colin shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unsure how to respond. I just did what seemed right, he said quietly. She was in pain. Lyra's golden eyes softened slightly, though her expression remained businesslike. That's exactly why I'm here. I need someone who sees Mira as more than just a medical case. Someone who can truly care for her. Colin blinked, not quite understanding. Care for her, he echoed. Listen, Colin, Lyra said, her voice lowering a touch. Myra's condition is rare. We've been searching for someone who could be her caretaker, someone who understands more than just the science of it all. You've shown me you have the compassion, the heart, that most of her current caretakers lack. And that's what she needs. Colin wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but the idea of being asked to do something more than just clean floors caught him off guard. I'm just a janitor, ma'am, he said, his voice uncertain. I don't think I'm qualified for anything like that. Lyra held up a hand, cutting him off. You are more than just a janitor, Colin. Your background, your experience as a combat medic, makes you uniquely qualified for the job. Mira needs someone who can not only care for her physically, but who can also give her the emotional support she's been missing. I've already had the Academy's medical team evaluate you, and they agree you're the right fit. Colin shook his head, his thoughts swirling. He had never considered himself as anything other than a worker, a man just trying to get by. The idea of becoming responsible for a child, especially one as delicate as Mira, seemed almost absurd. I don't know if I can handle something like that, he muttered. Lyra leaned forward, her golden eyes intense. I'm not asking you to handle it alone. I'll make sure you have everything you need, resources, support, medical assistance. But I need someone who can look at Mira and see a person, not just a condition. Someone who can bring her a sense of normalcy in a world that doesn't offer her much of that. There was a long silence. Colin's heart raced. He had been trained to deal with life-and-death situations, but this felt different. This wasn't about saving soldiers on a battlefield. It was about saving a child's future. Lyra continued, her voice softer now. I'll compensate you for your time, Colin. The position will pay well, more than you've ever made. You will have access to all the medical resources we have, and you'll live with Mira and me at my estate. You won't have to worry about anything. Colin's mind raced. He wasn't blind to the opportunity. The money was enticing, but something about it felt too easy, too good to be true. Was he really the right person for this? I can't promise anything, Colin said after a long pause. I don't know if I'm cut out for this kind of responsibility. Lyra's eyes softened, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in her gaze. I'm not asking for promises, Colin. I'm asking for a chance. A chance to give Mira a life that's more than just surviving. A chance to help her thrive, in whatever way we can. Colin looked down, his fingers gripping the edge of his chair. His life had been a series of calculated risks, but this felt different. Mira wasn't just some mission. She wasn't a war zone to navigate. She was a child who needed someone to see her, to care for her in a way no one else had. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said quietly. I'll do it, but I need to know everything about her treatment. I won't take the job without understanding what I'm walking into. Lyra smiled, the faintest hint of relief in her eyes. Of course, you'll have all the information you need. We'll begin as soon as you're ready. As Colin left the room, his mind was spinning. He had just accepted a responsibility he hadn't even fully grasped. But one thing was clear, his life had just taken a turn. And whether he was ready or not, he was about to be a part of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The following week felt like a whirlwind for Colin Grant. What had started as a simple, mundane job at the Galactic Research Academy had transformed into something entirely unexpected. He had barely processed his decision to accept Lyra's offer before his life was overtaken by the weight of the new role he had agreed to play. Colin found himself at the entrance to Lyra's estate, standing before a grand structure that felt more like a monument than a home. The mansion was a breathtaking blend of advanced technology and organic design. Curved metallic towers stretched skyward, their surfaces gleaming in the early morning light. Lush gardens surrounded the building, filled with alien plants that looked as if they had been grown from the very walls themselves. As he approached the entrance, a feeling of discomfort settled over him, as if he were intruding into a world he didn't belong in. But there was no turning back now. A sleek hovercar glided silently to a stop beside him, and out stepped Lyra, her presence as commanding as ever. She greeted him with a nod, her gold-flecked eyes taking in his appearance. "Welcome to my home, Colin," she said smoothly, her voice carrying a mixture of warmth and authority. "Thanks," Colin muttered, looking up at the towering entrance before them. "This place is something else." Lyra smiled faintly, but there was no amusement in her expression. "It's a bit much, I know, but it's where we live, and where you'll be staying as well. Follow me." As they walked through the massive marble and glass halls, Colin couldn't help but feel out of place. The academy had been cold and sterile, but this was different. The mansion's sleek, cold surfaces contrasted with the warmth of the living spaces inside. Everything was designed to impress, to show power and wealth, but Colin found it all strangely unwelcoming. Lyra led him down a series of corridors, each more luxurious than the last, before stopping at a large door at the end of the hallway. It opened silently, revealing a room with large windows overlooking the estate's gardens. But it wasn't the view that caught Colin's attention. It was the girl sitting in the center of the room. Mira. She was in her hover chair, surrounded by advanced medical equipment, but despite the sterile setting, her gaze lit up when she saw Colin. Her violet eyes sparkled with recognition. "Colin," she called, her voice full of excitement. "You're here." Colin's chest tightened at the sight of her. Despite the sterile equipment and the cold, impersonal room, Mira's smile was genuine, and it made everything feel more real. "Hey there, Mira," Colin said with a smile, walking over to her. His initial discomfort started to fade in the presence of the girl who had drawn him into this strange new world. Lyra watched the interaction from the doorway, her expression softening for a brief moment. "Mira's condition is complicated," she said, breaking the silence. "We've had doctors from across the galaxy trying to stabilize her, but no one has been able to offer a solution. The treatments have been harsh, and the progress has been slow." Colin nodded, his mind racing. Mira's treatment plan had already been a topic of conversation between him and Lyra during their earlier meetings. He had heard that her condition was genetic, a rare disease that had taken hold of her young body, slowly robbing her of the ability to function. Yet, the more Colin thought about it, the more he was convinced that the treatments Mira was undergoing weren't helping as much as they should. "This room is where you'll be staying for now," Lyra continued, her voice returning to its usual authoritative tone. "We've arranged a space for you in the wing next to Mira's. You'll have full access to everything you need to care for her, medical data, staff support, whatever is necessary." Colin glanced over at Lyra, his mind still processing. "What exactly do you need me to do?" Lyra's gaze didn't falter. "You will be Mira's primary caretaker. You'll monitor her health, assist with her treatments, and, most importantly, you'll be her companion. Mira has been alone in this. Her condition has isolated her from the rest of the world. I need you to give her more than just medical care. She needs someone who sees her as more than a patient. She needs a friend." Colin took a deep breath. The weight of the responsibility was heavier than he expected, but something inside him stirred at Lyra's words. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to make a real difference in Mira's life. "And what about the treatments?" Colin asked, his brow furrowing. "I've looked over the medical data, but something doesn't feel right. The treatments seem aggressive, even dangerous. Are there any other options?" Lyra's eyes flickered briefly, a flash of something unreadable crossing her features. "The treatments are the best we have right now. They were developed by my late husband, Talon, Texas. He was a brilliant scientist, and he dedicated his life to finding a cure for Mira's condition. But since his passing, the progress has slowed. We've tried every possible option." Colin nodded slowly, but something about her answer didn't sit right with him. He'd seen enough in his time as a combat medic to know when something wasn't adding up. And right now, it felt like there were pieces missing from the story. "I'll help Mira, of course," Colin said, pushing his doubts aside for the moment. "But I need to know everything. All the details. I can't take this on without understanding the full picture." Lyra's gaze softened, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps hesitation. You'll have all the information you need. I'll make sure of it. In the days that followed, Colin settled into his new role. His quarters were modest compared to the grandeur of the rest of the mansion, but they were comfortable enough. Each morning, he would wake early, grab a quick breakfast in the staff quarters, and then head straight to Myra's room. There, he spent hours helping her with her physical therapy, assisting with the various treatments prescribed by the doctors, and simply talking to her. Mira was a bright and curious child, but her condition had left her isolated from most of the world. She spoke little about the pain she felt from the treatments, but Colin could see it in her eyes. Yet, despite everything she had been through, Mira remained positive, always eager to learn, to talk about her favorite subjects, alien animals, far-off planets, and the things she dreamed about doing when she was older. As the days went on, Colin grew closer to Mira. He found himself caring for her in ways he hadn't expected. At first, it was the duty of a caretaker. But soon, it became something more. He started to see her as more than just a patient. She was a little girl with hopes and dreams, and it became his mission to help her find a way to live a life worth living. But as Colin became more involved in Myra's care, he began to notice something else. The medical team, while helpful, didn't seem as invested in Myra's well-being as they should have been. There were discrepancies in the data, strange anomalies in the treatments that didn't add up. Something was wrong, and Colin was determined to find out what it was. As the sun began to set one evening, Colin sat beside Mira, her small hand resting in his. He had made a decision. The questions in his mind could no longer wait. It was time to dig deeper. He had to know the truth about Myra's treatments, and if that meant going against Lyra, then so be it. Mira needed a guardian, and Colin would be damned if he let her down. The mansion's halls felt colder than usual that evening, and Colin couldn't shake the sense of unease that had been building inside him. The more time he spent with Mira, the more he realized that the pieces of the puzzle just weren't fitting together. Lyra had promised him full access to all the medical data and resources he needed, but something in her words, the subtle way she danced around certain topics, made him feel like there were things she wasn't telling him. Colin had spent days going over Myra's medical records, trying to find any clues that would explain the inconsistencies he had noticed in the treatments. The patterns of the enzyme paste, the odd frequency of the neural stimulators, the sharp spikes in Myra's vitals after each treatment. It didn't make sense. These weren't the signs of a well-designed protocol. They were the red flags of something much more dangerous. Tonight, as he sat at Myra's bedside, a thought gnawed at him. What if Lyra was hiding something? The possibility seemed absurd at first, but the more he considered it, the more it made sense. Myra's illness was rare, and Lyra had been desperate to find a cure, but desperation could make people do terrible things. Mira was asleep, her small form curled beneath the blankets. The soft hum of the medical equipment in the room was the only sound breaking the silence. Colin's fingers hovered over the datapad Lyra had given him, the one with all of Myra's medical information. It had been weeks since he started studying it, and yet he still hadn't found the full truth. He knew that if he was going to help Mira, he needed to dig deeper. Taking a deep breath, Colin glanced at Mira once more. Her face was peaceful, almost angelic in her sleep. She deserved better than this, a life filled with uncertainty and pain. He wasn't going to let her suffer if he could do something about it. His eyes locked on the datapad. This was it. He was going to look beyond the surface. Colin accessed Myra's treatment history, tapping through the files to the encrypted section he had been avoiding. The medical team had made it clear that certain parts of the data were restricted, but he was no stranger to getting around security measures. His combat medic training had taught him how to deal with obstacles, and this was no different. The screen flickered for a moment before the data decrypted. Colin's pulse quickened as he scrolled through the new files, patient records, treatment logs, medication schedules. Then, his eyes stopped on a single entry. It was dated 3 weeks ago, the day Myra's condition had worsened after the last treatment. The notes were brief, but they painted a disturbing picture. Increased dosage of neurostimulants administered against standard protocol. Possible side effects, cognitive impairment, internal organ damage. Colin froze. This wasn't part of the treatment plan Lyra had shown him. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. He dug deeper, searching for more anomalies. As he read, his stomach sank. The files revealed a pattern of dosage adjustments made without proper consultation or approval. Someone had been tampering with Myra's treatment plan, changing things behind the scenes. The name that appeared most frequently in these unauthorized changes was one Colin had seen before, Dr. Krell, the lead physician on Myra's case. Colin's fingers tightened around the datapad. Krell. Of course. The man had been cold and dismissive every time Colin had raised concerns. But now, it was clear that Krell had been making unauthorized alterations to Myra's treatment, possibly without Lyra's knowledge. Colin scrolled further through the files, and there it was, an encrypted message, sent 2 days ago from Krell to an unknown recipient. The message was short, coded in a way that made Colin's head spin. But one word jumped out at him: progress. He knew he had to tell Lyra. But the question was, could he trust her? If Krell had been making these changes, did she know? Or was she just as much in the dark as he was? The next morning, Colin found himself in the main dining room of the mansion, waiting for Lyra. His mind was racing. The truth had to come out. Myra's life depended on it, but so did the future of everything he had agreed to do. Lyra entered, as composed and elegant as ever, her golden eyes scanning the room. She had a quiet power about her that made even the grandest spaces feel like her domain. "Colin," she said, her voice calm but carrying a hint of curiosity. "I trust everything has been going smoothly." Colin met her gaze. His throat felt tight, but he forced himself to speak. "I've been going over Myra's medical records," he said slowly, his words measured. "There are some things I need to ask you about." Lyra raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "What kind of things?" "I found irregularities, changes in her treatment that weren't authorized," Colin said, his voice steady. "Someone has been adjusting her medication and dosage. I need to know who did this and why." For a moment, Lyra said nothing. Her eyes flickered to the datapad in Colin's hands, and he could see a subtle shift in her expression. A flicker of something, a spark of recognition, maybe even fear, passed over her face before she regained her composure. "I see," she said, her tone as calm as ever. "I thought you might notice." Colin's heart skipped a beat. "You knew?" Lyra nodded slowly. "I did. And so did Krell. But the decisions weren't made lightly, Colin. Myra's condition was deteriorating faster than anyone anticipated. We had to make adjustments to give her a chance. I didn't want to tell you until I was sure it was the right move." "Right move," Colin repeated, his voice rising slightly. "You can't just mess with someone's treatment like that without telling anyone. Especially not without Myra's consent. She's a child." Lyra's gaze hardened, but there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like regret. "You don't understand. Mira is special. She's the last of her kind. The Azuran people are dying out, and I couldn't let my daughter fade away with them." Colin was stunned. "You were trying to save her," he said quietly, "but you put her life at risk." Lyra stood still, her eyes downcast. "I had no choice, Colin. The research was incomplete. There were gaps, and I couldn't just sit by and watch my daughter slip away." Colin took a step forward, his eyes searching Lyra's face. "Then why didn't you tell me sooner? Why keep it a secret?" "Because I wasn't sure I could trust anyone with the truth," Lyra admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I was afraid of what the truth might mean for Mira. And for me." There was a long silence between them, the weight of their conversation heavy in the air. Colin's mind was reeling. He had expected to confront a lie, but instead, he was faced with something much more complicated. Lyra had done what she thought was best, but in the process, she had made decisions that could cost Mira everything. "You should have told me," Colin said quietly, his voice firm. "But we can't change the past. We need to figure out what's best for Mira now." Lyra nodded slowly, the weight of the moment settling over them both. "You're right," she said softly. "And that's why I'm asking for your help, Colin. Mira needs you now more than ever." Colin looked at her, the responsibility of what he had just learned settling in. "I'll help her. But we need to stop making decisions in the dark. No more secrets." Lyra's eyes softened for the first time in their conversation. "Agreed," she said quietly. For the first time since he'd stepped into this world, Colin felt like he was standing on solid ground. He didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain. He would fight for Mira, no matter what. Days blurred into one another for Colin as he navigated his new reality. Myra's treatment had shifted again, and despite the promises from Lyra, the situation seemed far from resolved. The mansion had become a place of quiet tension, a place where every corner felt like it was hiding something. Colin was no longer just Myra's caretaker. He was the protector of a secret too big to ignore. The new medication, a mixture of neural enhancers and metabolic stabilizers, had been introduced as part of Myra's revised treatment plan, yet Colin noticed no improvement. Instead, Myra's condition seemed to worsen. Her strength was draining away, her once vibrant eyes growing duller with each passing day. But the medical staff, especially Dr. Krell, remained dismissive. There was no room for discussion, only cold protocol. Colin had spent the past few days monitoring Myra closely, keeping track of any small changes, no matter how insignificant they seemed. His gut told him something was wrong, but the more he questioned the staff and combed through the records, the more elusive the answers became. It was as if there were invisible walls everywhere he turned. Tonight, as the mansion settled into its usual rhythm, Colin found himself pacing the vast, empty corridors. Myra was sleeping soundly in her room, her medical equipment whirring softly in the background, a constant reminder of the fragile line she was walking. Colin had decided to confront Lyra once again. He had to know what was going on behind the scenes, what she wasn't telling him. Just as he reached the door to Lyra's study, a low hum echoed through the hallway. Colin paused, his instincts flaring. It was the sound of an encrypted transmission, a signal that someone in the mansion was sending messages. He knew from his time as a combat medic that it wasn't the normal, everyday comms protocol. This was something deeper. Curiosity gripped him. Without thinking twice, Colin turned and followed the sound to a small utility room at the end of the hall, hidden behind a set of ornate, automatic doors. Inside, there was a console, a far cry from the high-tech systems used throughout the rest of the mansion. This one was older, more discreet, and appeared out of place in a building of such luxury. The signal came from there. Colin's heart raced as he approached the console. He ran his fingers over the surface, and the screen flickered to life. The transmission was almost over, but the last few words froze him in his tracks. The experiment needs to continue. It must. He recognized the voice. It was Dr. Krell. Colin's stomach tightened. There was no doubt now. Krell was at the center of whatever was going on here. And the fact that Myra's treatment had been altered repeatedly without his knowledge made it clear that this wasn't just about care. This was something far more dangerous. The screen faded back into darkness, and the room fell silent again, but Colin's mind was racing. The words, "the experiment needs to continue," echoed in his thoughts. Was Myra part of some kind of experiment? He didn't know what to make of it, but the urgency in Krell's voice made it sound like there was far more to this story than he had been told. The next morning, Colin couldn't focus on his usual tasks. He had to get answers. The creeping suspicion that Lyra and the medical team were hiding something from him now seemed like an undeniable truth. Myra's life was at stake, and he couldn't stand by and do nothing. He found Lyra in the grand dining hall, overseeing a small meeting with some of the mansion's staff. As she turned to greet him, her usual composure slipped just for a second. A flicker of something almost like guilt crossed her face. "Colin," she said, the name almost sounding strained. "Is everything all right with Myra?" "I need to talk to you," Colin said, his voice firm. "It's about the treatments, and about Krell." Lyra's expression darkened immediately. "What about Dr. Krell?" "I've been following Myra's progress closely, and I've found some inconsistencies. I don't think he's following the protocols we agreed on. And last night, I intercepted a transmission that—" Lyra raised a hand, cutting him off. "I told you, Colin. I made those decisions with Krell. We've been experimenting with different approaches to treat Myra's condition. The changes were necessary." Colin's blood ran cold. "Experimenting? With Myra?" He couldn't hide the disbelief in his voice. "She's not an experiment, Lyra. She's your daughter. You promised me you were doing everything you could to help her, but now you're telling me that this is all part of some experiment." Lyra's eyes flashed with something Colin couldn't place. Anger, regret, maybe even fear. "You don't understand," she said, her voice sharp. "I've been trying to save her. You have no idea what it's like to watch someone you love slowly fade away, knowing you can't do anything to stop it." Colin's jaw clenched. "Then why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" His voice softened, the frustration in his tone turning to a more measured calm. "I need the truth, Lyra. All of it. Myra deserves that much." For a moment, Lyra was silent, her gaze distant, as if she was wrestling with something inside. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and almost apologetic. I didn't tell you because I was afraid. Afraid of what you might think. But you deserve to know. Myra's condition is rare, Colin. It's not just a disease. It's the result of a genetic manipulation, an experiment that my late husband started years ago, before he died. He believed that Mira could hold the key to saving the Azuran race from extinction. Colin felt his legs go weak as the weight of her words sank in. What? What are you saying? He asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. Mira isn't just a victim of a disease, Lyra continued, her voice trembling slightly. She's the product of genetic engineering, of attempts to alter her DNA in order to give her abilities that would make her unique in ways no one can fully understand. Talon, my husband, believed that she could be the answer to saving our people. But the experiments, they weren't ready, Colin. They were never meant to go this far. Colin's heart pounded in his chest. Everything had shifted in that moment. Myra's illness, the treatments, Lyra's secrecy, it all made a twisted kind of sense now. Myra's treatments, he said, his voice shaking, they're not just to cure her. They're to what? Complete the experiment. Lyra's silence was the only answer Colin needed. The truth, ugly and terrifying, hung in the air between them. Where is she? Colin asked, his voice now urgent. Where's Mira? Lyra looked at him, a strange mix of sorrow and determination in her gaze. She's in the lab, Colin, and you need to decide what's more important to you, the truth or saving her. For the first time since he had walked into this mansion, Colin realized that the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just Myra's health on the line now. It was everything. The mansion's walls seemed to close in on Colin as he stood before the lab entrance, the air heavy with tension. Lyra's confession had shattered everything he thought he knew about Myra's condition. She wasn't just a child with a rare illness. She was the culmination of a dangerous experiment. A life designed, not born, and one that might not have been meant to survive. His mind raced as he recalled the words Lyra had said. You need to decide what's more important to you, the truth or saving her. He had no choice but to face the truth. Myra's life was at stake, and he couldn't turn away now, no matter how deeply tangled the web of lies had become. The real question was, how much of this was actually about Mira, and how much of it was about Lyra's unrelenting desire to save her people? Pushing open the sliding doors to the lab, Colin was immediately hit with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the hum of machinery. The room was dimly lit, save for the soft glow of monitors and the faint blue light of a medical scanner. But it wasn't the lights or the equipment that drew Colin's attention, it was Mira. She sat at the center of the room, a soft glow emanating from her as the monitors beeped around her. Her hoverchair was surrounded by an array of machines, pulsing, whirring, analyzing. But she looked so small in the center of it all, so fragile. Colin stepped closer, his breath catching as he saw the tubes running from Myra's arms, connecting her to the machines. This was no ordinary treatment. It was a life support system. The sight of her in this condition made his heart ache. Mira had been caught in the middle of something much bigger than she could ever understand. Her violet eyes flicked to him, and a small smile tugged at her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Colin, she whispered, her voice weak but filled with warmth. You came. I'm here, Mira, Colin said, his voice steady, though his insides twisted. He pulled up a stool beside her, sitting down slowly as he reached out to take her hand. How are you feeling? Better, I think, she said softly, her head tilting to the side as if trying to gauge his reaction. But they keep changing things, the doctors, the treatments. Sometimes I don't feel like myself anymore. Her words hit Colin like a punch to the gut. Mira had always been brave. He could see that now, but she was trapped in something beyond her control. This wasn't just a medical crisis. This was a manipulation of her very essence. I'm not going to let them do this to you anymore, Colin murmured, brushing a strand of her hair away from her face. He wasn't sure if it was for her or for himself that he said it. He needed to believe that he could make a difference, that he could stop the madness Lyra had set in motion. Before Mira could respond, the door to the lab slid open, and Lyra entered. She looked different now, her usually composed demeanor cracked, her eyes filled with an emotion Colin couldn't quite name. Mira, Lyra said softly, her voice almost breaking as she looked at her daughter. How are you feeling, sweetheart? I'm okay, Mama, Mira replied, though her eyes flickered briefly to Colin. Colin says I'll be okay. Lyra's gaze shifted to Colin. For a brief moment, her gaze softened, almost like she was relieved, but the hardness returned quickly. I didn't want you to find out like this, Colin, she said, her voice calm but tight. But now that you have, I need you to understand the stakes. Mira is not just my daughter. She's the result of an effort to save an entire species. You can't just undo what's been done. I've tried everything to stabilize her. Everything. And this is the only way to give her a chance. Colin stood up, his fists clenched. A chance? By turning her into a living experiment. Myra's life is the culmination of years of work, Lyra continued, her voice trembling with emotion, but also with a cold determination. Talon and I, she paused, her expression flickering with pain. We made choices. Hard choices. But you don't know the stakes. You think this is about saving a child. It's not just about saving Mira. It's about saving my people. The Azurans. We're dying, Colin. Our population is too small to survive. And Mira, she's the key. Her genetics, they could hold the answer to saving the entire species. Colin's jaw tightened. At what cost? You've sacrificed her innocence, her freedom. All of this for something you believe is necessary. But she's not a tool, Lyra. She's a person. Lyra flinched as if his words struck her more deeply than she had expected. I never wanted this for her, she whispered, her voice raw. But there's no time left. I didn't have a choice. You don't understand, our entire race is hanging by a thread. Mira is the last hope. Colin's heart sank. This wasn't just a mother trying to save her child. This was a woman consumed by desperation, willing to sacrifice everything for a future that might never come. He took a step back, shaking his head. I understand enough to know that you've blinded yourself to the truth. Mira isn't some experiment. She's a child, and I'm not going to let you turn her into something she's not. Lyra's eyes darkened. You don't have the right to decide what's best for her, Colin. You think you can just walk in here and... I do have the right, Colin interrupted, his voice steady and resolute. You brought me into this. And now I'm telling you, I'm not going to let you do this anymore. If Myra's going to survive, it won't be because of your experiments. It'll be because we make her treatment about her, not about your mission, your hopes, or your fear of what happens if she fails. The silence between them was deafening, each word hanging in the air like a threat. Myra's fragile form sat between them, the weight of their conversation pressing down on her small shoulders. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice barely a whisper. What do you want from me, Colin? I want you to stop the treatments, Colin said firmly. I want you to let Mira be a child again. If there's a chance for her to survive, we'll find it together, without the lies. Without using her as a pawn. Lyra's gaze flickered toward Mira, then back at Colin. For the first time in their conversation, there was a crack in her armor. She looked at Colin, her eyes filled with something that almost resembled defeat. And if I can't do that, she asked quietly, what happens then? We start over, Colin replied softly. We find a way to help her, not hurt her. Together. Lyra's shoulders sagged, and for the briefest moment, she seemed like the mother she was meant to be. Not the scientist, not the desperate leader of a dying race, but a woman who just wanted her child to be safe. I'll stop the treatments, Lyra said, her voice filled with resignation. But I can't promise it will be enough. Colin nodded, his expression softening. It's enough. For now, it's enough. As he turned to leave, Myra's small voice called out to him. Will I be okay, Colin? He looked back at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her trust. I don't know yet, Mira, but I won't stop fighting for you. With that, he walked out of the lab, Lyra's weary gaze following him, and the truth finally settling in his chest. The battle had only just begun. The mansion was quieter than usual as Colin walked down the long, empty hallways. The usual hum of machinery was replaced by a tense stillness that seemed to hang in the air. Myra's room was now a place of calm, a sanctuary away from the chaos of the past weeks. The intrusive medical equipment had been disconnected, the harsh lights dimmed to a gentle glow. Mira was resting, and for the first time in days, Colin didn't feel the weight of impending disaster pressing on his chest. The truth had finally been revealed. Lyra had agreed to halt the treatments, to stop treating Mira as an experiment. It had been the hardest decision she had ever made, but the fear in her eyes when she looked at Mira now was undeniable. She wasn't just afraid of losing her people anymore. She was afraid of losing her daughter. As Colin stood in front of Myra's door, he took a deep breath. He had kept his promise. He had fought for Myra's right to a life free of the manipulations that had shaped her existence so far. But there was still much work to be done. Healing wasn't just physical. It was emotional, mental, and, for Myra, it was the hardest part. He pushed the door open slowly, stepping inside. Myra was awake now, her small form propped up on pillows. She smiled when she saw him, her eyes brighter than before, the faint traces of fear gone for the moment. "Hey, kiddo," Colin said softly, taking a seat beside her. "Are we done now?" Myra asked, her voice still quiet, but there was a spark of hope in her words. Colin nodded, reaching for her hand. "Yes, for now, we're done with all of that. The treatments, the experiments, they're over. You don't have to worry about that anymore." Myra's expression softened as she absorbed his words. It was clear that a part of her had been waiting for the day when she could finally feel safe. But another part of her seemed unsure if the world she was now in would hold true to this promise. "But what happens now?" she asked, looking up at him with those big, violet eyes that had seen so much more than any child should. Colin looked down at her, his mind racing for an answer. What had happened now? They were no longer racing against time to save her from a disease that had been genetically engineered. Instead, they were on a new path, one where hope was the only thing they had. And it wasn't just hope for Myra, but hope for Lyra as well. For once, they could choose a future that wasn't dictated by fear or desperation. "We take things one day at a time," Colin said with a gentle smile. "We're going to help you feel better, Myra. No more drugs. No more experiments. We'll find a way to give you the life you deserve." Myra's hand squeezed his in response, a small but significant sign of her trust. For a moment, the weight of everything, Lyra's burden, Myra's survival, and Colin's role in all of it, seemed to lighten. Later that day, as the sun dipped low behind the grand mansion, Colin sat outside, staring out at the gardens. The tranquil beauty of the estate did little to ease the turmoil in his mind, though. He had kept his word to Myra, but that didn't mean all was well. Lyra had done more than just harm her daughter's body. She had risked her mind, her very soul. Healing wouldn't come easily, not for Myra, and certainly not for Lyra. But there was time now, time that they hadn't had before. Colin's thoughts were interrupted by a soft step behind him. He turned to see Lyra approaching, her face as tired as ever, but with a softness to it he hadn't seen before. It was as if the walls had come down, the coldness that had always marked her finally starting to crack. She looked almost human again. "I owe you an apology," Lyra said quietly, her voice steady but thick with regret. "For everything. For keeping secrets. For putting Myra through this. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. I lost sight of what really matters." Colin didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to say anything, Lyra knew. She had seen it in Myra's eyes, in the trust Colin had placed in her to make the right decision. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what I put her through," Lyra continued, her eyes welling with unshed tears. "But I will do everything I can to make it right. For Myra. For you. For our future." Colin finally stood up, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "The past is done, Lyra. You can't change it. But you can change the future. We can change it. Together." Lyra looked at him, her golden eyes searching his face as if trying to read the sincerity in his words. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "Together," she repeated, the word carrying weight. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing one, Myra grew stronger. The fear that had once consumed her faded bit by bit. She was allowed to be a child again, playing, laughing, even making friends with some of the other children in the academy. No longer did she wake up to machines monitoring her every breath. No longer was she part of an experiment. Lyra, too, began to heal. She spent more time with Myra, offering her the love and support she had once withheld. The guilt was still there, of course, buried deep within her, but with each smile from Myra, she found herself beginning to forgive herself. Maybe not completely, but the first steps were there. Colin remained by their side, his role as protector now not just of Myra, but of this fragile new family. He watched as the two women, both wounded in their own ways, found solace in each other. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but it was real. The truth was out now, and with it came the promise of a new beginning. And somewhere along the way, Colin realized that, for the first time in years, he had found a home. Not in the mansion, not in the grand corridors, but in the simple, quiet moments with Mira and Lyra. They had given him more than just a place to stay. They had given him a purpose. And in return, he would give them a future, one built on trust, not secrets. They didn't have all the answers yet, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But as Colin sat beside Mira on the balcony that evening, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the sky, he knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. And that, in itself, was a victory.